Hello and welcome to another episode of the Initial NBA podcast. It is your host CJ. What's up? We're here to talk some basketball. Today's episode, great one. First, we're going to start out. We're going to kind of run through each NBA team and figure out what that burning question is. You know, coming in every year, we don't know what's going to happen. There's questions all over the place. You know, will Evan Mobley, finally break out offensively? What's going to happen with James Harden? Questions like that. I go through each team, figure out kind of what their most pressing question is, and what I hope throughout the regular season. What I hope actually gets answered. Then after that, we're gonna hit up a final set of predictions. I've already talked about who I think is going to win all the awards. Talked about the tiers of who I think are the good and bad teams in the NBA in the upcoming season. But one thing I haven't talked about is who do I think is going to win the championship. So in this episode today, I give you a breakdown of who I think is going to be in the West and Eastern Conference Finals, and then give you my prediction for who's going to win the whole thing this coming up season. So great episode. Just programmer reminder: if you have not seen, I am now putting this podcast on YouTube as well with video. So if you ever want to see my pretty face, you can go check it out on YouTube. But until then, get to the rest of the episode. All right, so we're about as of this recording right now, about a week out from the NBA season tip off. When you guys are listening to this, we'll be a couple days into the season, but regardless, going in every season at the beginning of the year, there's always questions that we have. Some of those questions are around teams are very big. Hey, what's even the direction of this franchise? What's going to happen to this star player, whatever. But then there are other questions that aren't quite as big, right? Like, hey, how do they fill out the 7-8 spots in their rotation? Obviously they're all important. But so this kind of segment's just to kind of go through each team and figure out what the big question is that I have for each team. So we're gonna run through these 30 questions, 30 teams. I guess let's just start in the East. So we got the Boston Celtics. For me, my big question is can Kristaps Porzingis stay healthy for a deep postseason run? Obviously, we got traded to Boston this offseason. Theoretically, he's going to be a great fit there. He's obviously a really good player. Maybe not the, multi-time All-Star that we thought at the start of his career in New York. But he's a super solid starter in the NBA. But the issue is, while he's a really good stretch big, he fits well. He's very talented, obviously. The issue is he's only played 65 games 3 times in his career. And 2 of those times were the first 2 seasons of his career. So, while Porzingis has been, is a really good big man to have, big stretch, I guess 4 or 5, depending on how you have him. There's questions about his health. And that's kind of what comes when you're 7'2", right? And you play the game like he does. So I mean, Boston already, they're already kind of thin in the front court. So if Porzingis goes down, that would be a big blow to Boston's championship aspirations, right? Luckily for them, though, of the 3 seasons that Kristaps Porzingis had played at least 65 games, last year was one of them. So I guess, that's my big question for Boston. Can he stay healthy throughout the season? And when I say healthy, I don't mean play all 82 games, 48 minutes. No. I'm talking by the time we're in playoff time, come April, is he healthy and is he contributing? Because he's, as close to 100% as he can be. So that's my big question for Boston. Can Kristaps Porzingis stay healthy for a deep postseason run? Because he's incredibly important to their championship aspirations. All right, the next we got the Brooklyn Nets. My big question for them is, will we see any piece of the old Ben Simmons? Obviously he's kind of been clowned on over the last 2-3 years or whatever. But we forget that he was really good before then. Even without him being able to shoot at all. He's a 3-time All-Star, 1-time All-NBA, 3-time All-Defense. So, my question is did Brooklyn, are they able to get any part of the old Ben Simmons? He's still, the talent's obviously still there. He's still 6'10". He still has, ridiculous passing vision. He still is could be a lockdown defender. With him, it's almost all the intangible part of the game. The mental part, the work ethic, wanting to get better, working on a jump shot, that type of thing. So I mean, if the Nets are able to get any piece of the old Ben Simmons, and I know it's preseason, but he's looked okay in the little bit I saw. The Nets could surprise if Ben Simmons steps up and is kind of back to more of his early Philly days type of form. Because remember, he's still only 27. He's still pretty young and just kind of entering his prime, whatever that ends up looking like for him. So, Brooklyn Nets, will we see Ben Simmons be Ben Simmons again? Next up that we have in the East is Toronto. This is kind of a bigger one. Will they finally blow it up and move one of or both of Siakam and Anunoby at the trade deadline? Toronto's kind of been in this weird middle ground, like kind of this no man's land, it feels like. Similar to Chicago, but maybe not quite as bad. And we'll get to Chicago. I have questions for them for sure. Toronto has kind of this young talent with, Anunoby, Siakam, Barnes. But it seems like the last couple years, they're always either flirting with, trading one of those guys, at least in terms of like trade talks and rumors around the league. But at the same time, they're also, flirting with, with the Dame Lillard sweepstakes, for example, right up to the trade of Lillard going to Milwaukee. Toronto was being mentioned as a possible landing spot. So my question for Toronto is, are they finally going to blow it up? Are they finally going to kind of hit the restart button, trade Siakam or Anunoby or both, and just kind of build around Scotty Barnes and, see what happens? What sucks with Toronto is they don't really have that top end number one star in order to really compete. And if you're a team kind of in that situation where you don't have that number one, but you have kind of these young guys you could build around, you might as well kind of do kind of a reset, trade your older guys that could get you a pretty big payday and rebuild. So that's my question for Toronto. Next up for Philadelphia. We all know what the question is, right? Well, how's the Harden situation going to play out in Philly? It's obvious. There's no other question I care about in Philadelphia. It's what happens with James Harden. In his play or lack of play in Philadelphia will completely determine what happens with Philly this year. If he plays well, Philly's top 3 seed in the East. I don't think there's any question about it. It's Milwaukee, it's Boston, and then it's Philly right after, assuming a healthy and willing James Harden. Now, if they trade him, what do they get back for him? Do they get something back that makes him a contender right away? Essentially equal value for Harden? Or are they getting picks and rebuilding pieces, in which case, Philly at that point is maybe a play-in team. Maybe a little better than a play-in team, but you get what I'm saying. They're not one of those contenders. And then there's the third scenario, which is probably the worst of them all, where he plays for Philly, but just kind of phones it in. He just kind of is just not there, doesn't care, doesn't try, plays terribly. I mean, he's done this before in Houston and in Brooklyn. So that's my question. How does the Harden situation fill out? Pretty obvious one, pretty easy one. This is a question everyone has with Philadelphia. Next up is the Knicks. With them, my big question is, do they finally make a move for a star? As awesome as Brunson is, and, I like Randall too, they have some other good pieces, they don't have enough for a deep playoff run. Brunson, if he's your number one best guy on your team, which right now he is the best player on the Knicks, I don't think that's not a championship caliber team. Now, New York, it seems like, is, at least even since I was a kid, has always been kind of linked to these stars and occasionally has gotten them. Carmelo Anthony, for example. But it seems like it's kind of been a while since they've gotten one of these big superstars. You remember when Jalen Brunson went to New York this last offseason, he wasn't the Jalen Brunson he is now. He was he's a pretty good player. The Mavs didn't want to pay him, and the Knicks got a steal. They got a star, not a superstar, but they got an all-star caliber player in Brunson. So, I mean, that's kind of the thing is, in these next 6 months, let's just say the Philadelphia thing doesn't work out and they get off to a rough start. Does Embiid try to make his way to the Knicks? Does some other disgruntled superstar look at New York and say, "Hey, they've got some really good players. They're already a playoff team. With me as the superstar, I can bring the Knicks over the top." And it feels like the Knicks are kind of due for some kind of superstar push. So that's my question for them. Do they make that move? I feel like it's kind of overdue, and there's definitely some candidates out there that I think would be pretty good fits in New York. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. All right, next up we got Chicago. My question for them is, what are you doing? They of all teams, I feel like, are in the worst position in the NBA. They're in this no man's land. So they don't have kind of that top end talent to compete. I love Zach LaVine. I love DeMar DeRozan. They're both great players, multi-time All-Stars, whatever. Neither one of them are number one options. You need a number one option to win a championship. They're both number two options at best, or number three, in probably LaVine's case, in my opinion. So they don't have that number one that you need to win a championship. They don't have the Jokic, the Embiid, the LeBron, the Curry, whoever. They have Vucevic. He's good, right? But at this point, he's 32 years old. He's starting to decline. So they don't have the top end talent. So you say, okay, well, maybe they have a young guy. Well, here's the thing. The Bulls don't really have a lot of young talent. Like Pat Williams, I think that's it. I can't think of any other young player playing for the Bulls right now. And then they signed Vucevic to an extension this last offseason, which when you sign a 32-year-old center who is starting to kind of lose a step for 3 to 4 years, that tells me that he's part of the long-term plans, which means it seems to me that they're not, at least at this point, at the start of the season, they are not wanting to go ahead and kind of blow it up and start over. Like, personally, I think they should. So, it's one of these cases where it feels like they're not good enough to really compete, but they're not bad enough to tank. So they're in this dumb, terrible, if you're a fan of theirs, no man's land, where they need to decide to pretty much have a fire sale, truly tank, and pretty much start over. And if you're in that situation where you don't have the top end talent to compete, you don't have necessarily the young assets to potentially become that top end talent, but you're not bad enough to really tank for top end young assets, you might as well just tank and just do it. You might as well just kind of sell off everything worthwhile that you have, and do it sooner rather than later. So that's my question for them. What the hell are they doing? The Vucevic extension was, it made me scratch my head a little bit, and it seems like they're just kind of content being, probably a 6 or 7 seed at best with no real shot at a finals run. Sorry, Chicago. That was a little harsh, but I'm imagining many Chicago fans probably agree. All right, next up, Cleveland Cavaliers. I think this is a commonly asked question with them. Does Evan Mobley take the offensive leap? I mean, he's already elite defensively. I think he made an all-defensive team last year. He's incredible, especially with how young he is defensively. But I mean, he offensively is still super raw. He still can't shoot. If he develops some kind of offensive game that is more than just dunking, that moves Cleveland into that Boston-Milwaukee territory in terms of tier of contender. Because they already have who I think could be a fringe number one in Donovan Mitchell. They already have, Mobley being a great defender, Jarrett Allen being a great defender. And then they have, Darius Garland, who's a really good point guard. If Mobley's able to take that leap to become the number two or even potentially the number one option on this team, Cleveland Cavaliers will make some big time noise in the East. So that's my question for them. Does he make that offensive leap? It feels like they need him to in order to get to where they truly want to go. But I mean, I guess we'll find out what happens. It's tough to win when you have Jarrett Allen and Mobley, who offensively are, neither one of them can really stretch the floor. So you're really limiting yourself in today's NBA, what you can do offensively, even with how amazing Donovan Mitchell is a lot of the time. Next up next up's Detroit. is James Wiseman a bust, or was Golden State just a bad situation? So James Wiseman, Detroit grabbed him from Golden State last year in a trade. His time in Golden State was rough. He had some injury issues, which probably stunted his growth there. He was, on a team that expected to compete for championships every year. So kind of like Jordan Poole, there really wasn't room for error. And I mentioned that in my last couple of podcasts talking about, anytime I mention Jordan Poole, it's one of those cases where I don't know if Golden State necessarily is the best environment for a young player, given kind of, one, how competitive some of the guys on that team are, and also kind of where they've been and where they expect to be. So, with Wiseman, I think it's still out as, is he a bust? He was number 2 overall pick. Or was Golden State just kind of a bad situation for him? In Detroit, he'll get opportunity to play. Similar to the end of last year, he got a lot of opportunity to play. And he was okay. He didn't blow your mind with how good he was. But maybe with a full off season, in Detroit, playing for a team where he has that time to develop, does Wiseman kind of show his promise that he had to be the number 2 overall pick? So, in Detroit, that's the guy I am watching for. Indiana. This is another trade related one. Will Buddy Hield be moved? It's been reported that Hield and Indiana can't come to an agreement on an extension. So they've kind of been feeling out the trade market for him. It kind of makes sense on both sides for this trade to happen. Buddy Hield's already 30 years old, which it doesn't feel like he's 30 years old, but he is 30 years old. He probably doesn't fit in Indiana's timeline, if we're being honest, given, their young core of Halliburton and Mathurin and, some of the other guys they got. But then at the same time, there's a lot of contenders that could use Buddy Hield. He's one of the best shooters in NBA, and I think looking at the numbers, he's one of the best shooters in NBA history. So I mean, this is one where I think is more likely to happen than not, especially with how Indiana's roster set up. Like, he's going to come off the bench, and as a 30-year-old sharpshooter who's never been in the playoffs, who's as good as he is, I don't know if he is really cool with that for much longer. So that's my question for Indiana. Will Buddy Hield be moved? Milwaukee. My question, we know how the offense is going to look. How bad does their defense regress? Losing Drew Holiday and getting Dame Lillard. So like I said, offense is going to be awesome. It's going to be amazing. Lillard and Giannis, it's basically a cheat code having both those guys on the same team. They complement each other perfectly in theory. Offensively, they're going to be great. Defensively, they're trading, one of the best guards in the NBA for one of the worst. And I will be interested to see, and that's where my question is how bad does that defense regress? Just to give you numbers, Milwaukee was number 4 in defensive rating last year, and number 1 in opponent's effective field goal percentage. So it was one of the best units in the NBA last year. The question is, it isn't necessarily will it get worse, it's how much will it get worse. It'll definitely take a step back, but in order for this Dame thing to work, that step back needs to be minimal, in comparison to the upgrade they got offensively. So that's my question for them. How bad is their defense regress? Washington. Jordan Poole. Is he a building block for Washington? Or is he just kind of more of like a bad contract they're just willing to eat because they got some benefit out of it? This is very similar to the James Wiseman situation, in my opinion. Though Poole definitely played more in Golden State. He'll have more opportunity to play and make mistakes and, be who he is. He's shown crazy flashes of being just a microwave like scorer, like, Steph Curry light, if you will. Maybe not quite that crazy, but he's been nuts on occasion. But he's also prone to making some really, really bad mistakes. Poor defense, bad decisions with the ball, whatever it is. In Washington, he's going to get the chance to show if he's a player to build around, rather than just being like, hey, we'll grab some picks, you give us a bad contract, we'll just sit on it for a couple years, and then call it a day. So that's my question for Washington: is Jordan Poole a building block, or is he a essentially salary filler while they kind of get things turned around? Atlanta. Does this team look any different under Quinn Snyder for a full season? So the Hawks fired Nate McMillan after starting 29-30 last year, and then hired Quinn Snyder at the end of the year. They finished 10-11 with Snyder at as coach. They actually also had 2 wins with an interim coach as well, Joe Prunty. So, my question is, why didn't he get the job? Just kidding. But yeah, Atlanta, they traded John Collins, and then they didn't really make any significant additions. So with Quinn Snyder, are they just another 500 team like they were last year? Or is it something where they end up kind of improving and becoming a team near the top of the East? So, essentially it's, will Atlanta be a 500 team? And if that's the case, then it's probably more of a talent, player personnel issue rather than a coaching thing. But if they end up kind of finishing much better than that, then it definitely was a coaching thing with Snyder coming in. So that's what I'm interested to see just in general, if they look any different or if they're just, a 500 team like they were last year. All right, Orlando Magic. Do they make the playoffs? And do they get an all-star this year? I guess this is 2 questions, so I'm kind of cheating. But, they have one of the best young cores in the NBA. I think the only one better is Oklahoma City. You talk about Franz, you talk about Paolo Banchero. Both those guys are awesome. But it might be a little too early to kind of have this team in the playoffs. Though, the East is rough, or might be kind of rough. So they definitely have a good shot of making it in. But again, this team is super young. There's only 2 guys over the age of 27 on this team, Joe Ingles and I think Gary Harris is the other one. So they're super young, but they have this young talent, especially in Franz and Paulo. Like, do they end up getting one of those 2 guys sneak in as an all-star? Remember, Paolo Banchero averaged 20 points last year, or like 20.8 or something like that. And then do they make the playoffs, which I think, kind of given their trajectory, I think is, and where the East is right now, I think they have a pretty decent shot of sneaking into that 6th seed. Miami. What happens now that they struck out on Dame Lillard? And they didn't land Drew Holiday. That's the other thing. When it comes to their point guard situation, they have a 37-year-old Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry's definitely, he's still okay, but he's not what he was, 5 years ago. So, they're very, very thin at the point guard position. And I understand, Hero probably will handle the ball some. Jimmy Butler's going to handle the ball a lot, but and honestly, they'll find some second round undrafted free agent, whatever, because this is what Miami does. But there's really not much room for them to make a move, unless they want to continue to get their team more. So I that's what I'm interested to see, is especially, since they didn't land Drew Holiday or Damian Lillard, how do they handle that point guard situation? Will Kyle Lowry kind of make it through a whole season, and will he be effective? I'm gonna be real. I'm never gonna count out Spoelstra and Jimmy Butler as long as they're in the NBA and on a team, especially after last year. But Miami really does have kind of an uphill battle on improving their team during the season. Given kind of their lack of resources and just the assets they just don't have, and just there's not much available as of right now. Well, that'll change through the trade deadline. So that's it for Miami. What do they do with point guard? What are they doing now? Charlotte Hornets. Does Brandon Miller look like a number 2 overall pick and a star to build around, or is he just okay? So I mean, I think we can all agree LaMelo's really good. And he isn't a bad start if you're trying to look for like building blocks to build around, right? But when you think of Charlotte as a franchise, and I guess this probably goes back to as long as Michael Jordan has owned them, they've been perpetually bad. They've made the playoffs 3 times in the last 19 years. Since coming back in 2004 as the Bobcats. It kind of feels like as a franchise, they should be more desperate for a star. because they really haven't had one outside of those couple years of Kemba Walker, right? Um, so I think given how deep this rookie class is, and obviously, we haven't seen anyone play. This could be a complete flop of a rookie class, but at least going in, it seems to be one of the better rookie classes we've seen in many years. Um, they almost have to hit on Brandon Miller, because if they don't, then that means they took him number 2 overall, ahead of guys like the Thompson twins, ahead of guys like Anthony Black, ahead of guys ahead of a bunch of dudes that potentially could be all NBA and all-star level players. So that's what I'm interested to see with Charlotte. Is Brandon Miller look like the number 2 overall draft pick, or does he kind of have some rough spots where you're like, I don't know if he should have went number 2 overall? Because if that's the case, you know, I don't. Charlotte is they're in a rough spot if that's the case. They were before, but there's just like compounding on misery basically at that point. All right, we move to the West. All right. First up, Minnesota. Does Anthony Edwards make that leap to superstar? There are not many players in the Nuggets playoff run last year that scared me more than Anthony Edwards. I've said this multiple times. It's basically him and Devin Booker were the 2 guys that scared me the most. He was awesome. I understand it was a 5-game series, but Anthony Edwards scared the crap out of me every time he touched the ball because he would relentlessly attack the basket, get fouls, and it was just all around amazing. He seems to kind of be next in line as that like next American superstar. He's kind of pretty much anointed as such. With Team USA over the summer, he was their main option. He was the guy. And then last year he made his first All-Star team, which I fully expect him to make it again. I think everyone is on the Anthony Edwards bandwagon. But my question is this the year he takes another big leap and become a kind of that superstar level, all NBA level player? Or is it, kind of more of a gradual improvement, right? Maybe he makes another All-Star team. Maybe he gets some All-NBA votes, but, maybe he doesn't vault himself into, like top 10, 12 in the NBA. So with Minnesota, I just want to see how Anthony Edwards progresses after what I thought to be a short but good playoff run last year, and then Team USA over the summer. Next up is Oklahoma City. With that, my question is, do they nab a top 3 seed and become kind of a dark horse contender in the West? Essentially, I'm thinking exactly like Sacramento last year. They're the most talented young team in the NBA. I put probably in the notes, they're the most talented young team in the NBA. Between SGA, Giddey, Williams, Chet Holmgren, they're nuts, okay, in terms of young talent. And last year, they finished, I think it was 10, if I'm not mistaken, as part of in the play-in. The year before, Sacramento was a 12 seed. Last year, it is a 3 seed. So I'm curious to see if Oklahoma City makes a similar leap going from, essentially a play-in team to a top 3 seed in the West. 100% could be too early to even be asking that question. But I think that's how much I love the talent they have on that team. And again, see what happens. But that's a team I'll be watching a lot on League Pass for sure. All right, Denver Nuggets. This is the one I can talk about the most because I know the Nuggets ins and outs more than pretty much every other team. Are they able to replace Bruce Brown's production internally, and to a lesser extent, fill in the gap left by Jeff Green leaving a free agency? But Bruce Brown's the big one, right? Bruce Brown was so important in the Nuggets last year, man. He was key in their run last year. He could fit everywhere on the floor. He was their backup point guard. He was their backup 2 guard. He played some 3. I know when he was in Brooklyn, he played a little bit of center, like super small ball center. So there were some points last year where he was kind of the 4th biggest guy on the floor even. And that's because of it. He had a ridiculous wingspan, right? So in terms of what he brought to Denver last year, he was the most versatile player on the team. Being able to play, regularly play 3 positions, occasionally would play 4th. He was the primary backup ball handler. Reggie Jackson had a rough time last year. So my question is, are the Nuggets able to replace his production, right? And this is something where it's not going to be one guy replacing everything that Bruce Brown did. He truly was kind of a unicorn almost with kind of the different ways he was able to play. But Christian Braun will play some more this year for sure. And then probably Peyton Watson will play as well. So I would imagine they end up trying to fill in Bruce's wing minutes with those two guys. And then they re-signed Reggie Jackson, who had a rough stint with the Nuggets last year, but maybe after an offseason and kind of getting more into the flow of the team, he's able to contribute more as the backup point guard. Do one of the rookies kind of contribute and take some of those Bruce Brown minutes that kind of got left open? Strother has looked awesome in the preseason. Maybe that's a potential candidate. They signed Justin Holiday to potentially contribute as a wing. That's my question for the Nuggets is, are they able to replace Bruce Brown's production kind of with who they have right now? And again, it's going to be two or more guys. It will not be one guy filling in Bruce Brown's shoes. Or are they going to have to go out and make a deal at the trade deadline to get, a wing combo guard type of player to kind of fill in what Bruce Brown gave him last year? So that's my big question with the Nuggets. And, there's questions as well with Jeff Green's production and how they're going to replace that. I think that's a little bit easier to fill. You probably play Zeke Naji a little bit more. Peyton Watson, I think, will play a lot and will probably play a lot of those backup 4 minutes. And then again with the rookie Hunter Tyson, he's got that dog in him. So it would not surprise me if he plays a decent amount this year. In the summer league, there were a couple games where he lit it up. So I'm interested to see what the Nuggets do to replace their 6-man and then their 7th guy that they lost from their championship run last year. All right, the Portland Trailblazers. Are they done dealing, or are there still moves to be made? For example, they still have Jeremy Grant, Malcolm Brogdon, Robert Williams. I think it might make sense, and this is my question for them, is are they going to keep any of those guys, or are those going to be the names floated around near the trade deadline that will allow Portland to get more assets out of the Drew Holiday and Dame Lillard trades? In my opinion, I think Portland might as well just kind of full send into a rebuild. Just say, screw it. Let's just get what we can out of those 3 guys. Maybe you keep one of them for a veteran presence, but honestly, I don't think that's a big deal if you don't. But I mean, there's all 3 of those guys: Jeremy Grant, Malcolm Brogdon, and Robert Williams. They would all net some decent assets. I know the Grant contract's a little big. But still, I still think he's still a good, like, small forward, power forward type player. Near the trade deadline, I would imagine we hear those names a lot. I'm just curious to see if they actually deal any of them, or if they kind of stand pat, and kind of roll with what they have and say, hey, we got enough assets for the essential 2-point guards we traded away. All right, next up, Utah Jazz. Walker Kessler, all defensive team this year? Maybe? Question mark? Last year he finished 4th in blocks as a rookie. And then finished 17th in defensive rating, 19th in defensive BPN, if you care about advanced analytics. He's already one of the better shot blockers in the NBA. He's a good defensive big already. But does he kind of take that step to become one of the premier defensive bigs in the league? Obviously, there's a lot of competition here. You still have Rudy Gobert, you have Bam Adebayo, you got Jaren Jackson Jr., you got a lot of really good defensive bigs. So I'm curious if Walker Kessler, after this year, makes an all-defensive team, and by the end of the year, we're talking about him in that same sentence as those other guys, those other just crazy good defensive centers. All right, Los Angeles Lakers. My big question for them is: does LeBron take any semblance of a step back in year 20 at age 39? It's crazy you even have to ask this question. Last year, he averaged 28.9 points per game, 8.3 rebounds, 6.8 assists at age 30 freaking 8. Okay, Will we see any type of decline? Or will he continue to be a superhuman? I feel like this is very similar to Tom Brady in the NFL. That man played until he was like 45 and was still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, like at least through age like 43, 44. I'm curious to see if we see something with LeBron where, if he starts to slow down. Personally, I don't think he will, which is, again, at age 39, crazy to even think about. But yeah, so that's the thing I'm looking for the Lakers. Is LeBron still LeBron? I would expect yes, but when a guy is pushing 40, you have to ask that question. All right, the Los Angeles Clippers. There's one question and one question only that matters for the Clippers. Will Kawhi and PG stay healthy? I said, can the team stay healthy? I mean PG and Kawhi. They both played 52 and 56 games last year, which, I mean, when you're thinking about their track record, that's really not that bad. The issue is Paul George missed the playoffs, and Kawhi only played in 2 games. And honestly, if both of those guys were to miss the entire regular season, the Clippers somehow make the playoffs, and then PG and Kawhi play in the playoffs, that's a better scenario. Essentially, the team needs them to play. They can sit out games during the regular season. That's fine. They're going to sit out a bunch of games. And honestly, when I talk about them staying healthy, I'm not talking about the regular season. I really, honestly, couldn't care less if they're healthy during the regular season. Like, stay healthy enough so you make the playoffs, I guess. But in order for the Clippers to make any sort of run, which again, I don't think they have enough talent to truly make a run. However, they do still have 2 of the best, forward wing players in the NBA. With how stacked the West is, the Clippers need those 2 guys to be 100% healthy come playoff time and to play throughout the whole playoffs. So I guess we'll see what happens there. They just can't stay healthy, and that's my question. Can they stay healthy? A little wrinkle here that I don't know if it'll matter, but I guess maybe keep in the back of your mind if something goes weird in Clipperland. Both of these guys have player options for next year, and neither have received extensions yet. As of right now, we're a week away from the NBA season. Neither Paul George or Kawhi Leonard has signed an extension. So just kind of keep that in mind. If the season doesn't start out well, and there's some acrimonious tensions on either side when it comes to an extension, maybe the Clippers do some weird stuff at the deadline. I don't know anything. I'm just saying that's like a sneaky, like something weird could happen there scenario. All right, Golden State. My question for them is, how awkward will the Chris Paul fit be? It's going to be weird. It's going to be a very awkward fit regardless, I think. It's not just the basketball fit, because Chris Paul is smart enough and good enough a basketball player to fit, basketball wise, however he needs to. But my question is more like, is he going to start? Is he going to come off the bench? If he does come off the bench, is he going to get pissed off about it? Over the summer, he made some kind of interesting comments, talking about, I think someone asked him like, hey, how do you feel about coming off the bench for the Warriors? And he basically said like, I'm not coming off the bench. That's paraphrasing, but that's essentially was the message of his answer. So, I guess when it comes to Golden State, what does their starting lineup look like? How does Chris Paul fit into all that? Are they going to start super small? I guess there's a world where you start out with, Curry, Paul as your guards, Klay Thompson at the 3, Andrew Wiggins with the 4, and Draymond at the 5. Like, I guess theoretically your main lineup could be super small, but to me, I feel like that ends up being a disaster against, teams that have like Jokic and Sabonis and Embiid and guys like that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Maybe I can't imagine Klay Thompson or Curry coming off the bench. So that kind of leaves Chris Paul as the one that theoretically would come off the bench. But again, is he going to cause an issue if that's the case? And then also the other thing, which is kind of more of a basketball fit, does he kind of adapt to Golden State's style of play, or do they adapt to him? Last year, Golden State was first in pace last year. So that doesn't really fit Chris Paul's game. He was 22nd last year in Phoenix in pace. So I am interested to see how he fits, I guess, a little bit from a basketball perspective in terms of pace of play for the Golden State Warriors. Phoenix Suns. My big question for them is, will their point guard play be a concern? Right now it seems like Booker and Beal kind of share point guard duties. Booker has played point guard a bit. At the beginning of his career in Phoenix, he played point guard a little bit. So it's not, completely weird and new. But Beal hasn't. As far as I know, I don't think Beal has ever really played point guard. So my question is, will that be an issue, not really having a true point guard on the roster? At least not a starter. I guess, theoretically, with a team of Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, they're going to figure out offensively. That offense is still going to be awesome. But I worry, and when I say worry, I'm a Nuggets fan, so I don't worry like real, but worry if I would be a Phoenix fan, like them not having a true point guard to run the offense, does that kind of screw them in certain situations? So yeah, that's my question for Phoenix would just kind of be how the whole point guard thing plays out. Maybe Booker it's good enough, Booker play some point guard, just kind of do like a positionless fluid thing where there really isn't a point guard, whatever. But yeah, I guess we'll see with Phoenix. That's going to be super interesting to see, and we'll see a lot of it. They're going to be on national TV a lot, so that one will be answered, I think, relatively quickly. Sacramento Kings, I guess, can they build on the surprising 3 seed finish from last year? So at the start of last year, I took a look at some of the projected seeds from a couple different websites. I don't remember what website in particular, but the 3 or 4 I looked at all had Sacramento finishing 10th or 11th in the West at the start of last year. They finished 3rd, obviously, which was quite a surprise, even though they were very good, like the beam for all of you in Sacramento. So my question is, was this just a fluke? I don't think it was a fluke. Sabonis is awesome. Fox is awesome. Keegan Murray is good. Like, Malik Monk is awesome. So, like, I don't think it was a fluke. But my question is, I want to see it again. Maybe not a 3 seed necessarily, but I want to see them kind of in the mix for a 3 or 4 seed. And if that does happen, maybe they kind of figure stuff out as a franchise, which would be awesome because they've kind of been a running joke for the last decade and a half, 2 decades. Basically since those Kings teams with Mike Bibby and Chris Webber, right? So I'd actually be stoked for Sacramento if that 3 seed proves to be a real thing. But that is my question. I would like to see if it's real, and 2, if they can build upon it. Memphis. Will Memphis be able to weather the storm during Ja's 25-game suspension? That 25-game suspension, I think, could be huge. I think a lot of people are underestimating how long that is. That's a third of the NBA season, basically. Not only that, but it's going to take him a little bit of time to kind of work his way back as well, I would think. So you're talking a 25 game suspension, but in reality, that probably impacts about 30 games for the Memphis Grizzlies. The West is going to be really good. I don't think there's really a whole lot of wiggle room for a bad stretch. So, if Memphis ends up going, let's just say 8-17 during that stretch, that might sink their season. So that's what I'm interested to see. Will they be able to weather the storm? Will a combination of Marcus Smart and Derrick Rose kind of give them enough at point guard to kind of keep them afloat until Ja Morant can get back? But yeah, I'm down on the Grizzlies just because of that. And it's not they have all the talent in the world, but a 25 game suspension for your best player is a killer. For a season, especially with a conference that's as competitive as the Western Conference, as we think it'll be. All right, next up, New Orleans Pelicans. I think we all kind of have the same questions for New Orleans this year. Can Zion finally stay in shape and have a healthy season? The Pelicans could be a 3 seed, a 2 or 3 seed if he's healthy and he's awesome. They could be a 13-14 in contention for the number 1 overall pick if he doesn't play. Their fates are entirely dependent on Zion being healthy and as good as he has been. In the last 2 seasons, he's played 29 total games, and only 114 over his 4 total seasons. So my big question for them is, can he stay in shape and stay healthy? Because that's the Pelicans' fates are entirely dependent on that. And then if he doesn't stay healthy, and the Pelicans end up having a terrible season, do they change course? Do they end up moving on from Zion? I don't think this is a crazy question. It feels like it should be a crazy question because he's number one overall pick, and when he is healthy, he is a top 20 player in the NBA. But when your top 20 player isn't dependable, at that point you start kind of looking for other solutions. So, yeah, that's my big thing with New Orleans. It's all about Zion. See what happens. Houston. Do we see improvements from Houston between their new rookies, young players, and hiring a new coach in Ime Udoka? So last year they finished tied for second worst record in the NBA. However, they did hire Ime Udoka as coach. He essentially has only been a coach for 1 year. Boston, when they went to the NBA Finals. So I do have questions on him too. Is that just because he's a good coach? Or was that just because Boston was super talented? Or was it a mix of the things? Does Jalen Green, Sengun, and Jabari Smith Jr. take another step forward? Does Amen Thompson, Cam Whitmore contribute and look promising as rookies? Did they bring the right vets in? Fred VanVleet and Jeff Green, yeah, 100%. Those are the right vets. Dylan Brooks, I'm a little more hesitant to say he's the right vet. Maybe he is. I don't know, but so that's my question for Houston. It's just like an overall did they will they improve just based on all the moves they made? I think they will. I think it's kind of hard to get any worse, but man, if this is a rough season for Houston, where they don't see improvement, their rookies kind of fall flat, the coaching is questionable, that could be a rough time for the Rockets franchise. San Antonio. Will Wemby be as good as we think right away? Or is there going to kind of be a longer than anticipated adjustment period? He's going to be really good. Let's not think too hard. He's 7'3" with ridiculous wingspan, with a wet jumper who could, block anything. Like, he's nuts. Okay, athletically, as a basketball prospect, he is insane. Okay. Question is, he's 7'4" and 210 pounds. He's going to be giving up 20 to 30 pounds to most NBA centers. And in some cases, like Jokic, he's giving up 75 pounds to that guy. Jokic weighs 280, 285 is what he's listed at. And Wemby weighs 210. Now, maybe, I don't know what San Antonio does in terms of protecting him. Maybe they play another true center next to Wemby, so Wemby's more of the power forward wing guy, so maybe it's not as big of a deal. But my question is, will there be? I mean, there's definitely going to be growing pains, but how severe are those growing pains going to be? In the preseason, he's looked really good, but against some of these bigger centers in the NBA, he's going to get bullied. I know he can come from 30 feet away in 2 strides and block a shot, but when a guy like Jokic or Embiid is going to back you down, it doesn't matter what your wingspan is, you're probably going to get beat there. And then the other thing that's kind of that I thought about here is, he's coming from playing professionally in France rather than playing in college. I don't know if that has any impact on how he adjusts, but it's something maybe to consider. There have been some really good French players in the NBA for sure. Tony Parker, Nick Batum, Boris Diaw, whatever. But I do wonder if maybe he has a little bit more of a learning curve coming from France, that while it's a good professional league, it's not the best professional league in Europe. That'd be more Spain. So it just it probably won't matter, but I do have that question of coming from not college and not Spain or some of those other leagues, that if that ends up kind of slowing his growth a little bit as he adjusts to the NBA game. Last one. I really brought the last one, the most fun one for last. Is this the last one? This is the last one. The Dallas Mavericks. All right, this is a fun one. Can Kyrie get through a season without causing some sort of distraction? Like, seriously, it's annoying that this has to be a question every year, but it seems that he just without fail wants to. I don't know if he even wants to. He's just like compelled by like some higher being, and maybe that's the one he believes in. I don't know. To just cause an issue or a headache. Like last year, he got traded. There was a trade request from the Nets. Okay, fine. Before that, he was suspended because of the anti-Semitic social media posts, and then he just decided he wasn't going to admit any wrongdoing, even though it's like, bro, you're sharing anti-Semitic crap on the internet. That's not cool. All right, and then he refused to admit any wrongdoing. It took him like a week and a half to be like, I'm sorry. Like, that's not hard to say, especially when you're obviously in the wrong. You know, prior to that, there was the conspiracy theory stuff, which I guess still is going on. You know, that stuff, it was pretty harmless to start. Flat Earth, okay, whatever. You're you're weird, but whatever. It doesn't really hurt much. But then it was like the more dangerous things, like refusing the COVID-19 vaccine, and that resulted in missed games. So like, there's always something with him that is completely unnecessary and causes a distraction to his team. You know, before that, it was demanding a trade from Cleveland because he wanted his own team. And that's how he ended up in Boston. And then, you know, after that, saying he wanted to stay in Boston for the rest of his career, and then, you know, immediately signing with Brooklyn the next summer. So basically, it seems like every 6 to 12 months, Kyrie Irving causes an issue, does something that is just not intelligent if you're a public figure. And he ends up becoming a distraction for his team off the court. I know, you know, he probably is like, oh, I'm fine. Well, it's like, you're not really the one. You may not be distracted, but your owner and the other players in your team having to feel questions because of your idiocracy are what the distraction is. So that's my question for the Mavericks. Can Kyrie get through a season without causing an issue? If I were to put money on it, I don't think he can. I just don't think he can help himself. I'm not a Kyrie Irving fan, so you know, whatever. And if I was an NBA team, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. He's just going to cause issues. He's incredible as a player, but I just can't look past the off the court stuff because there's always something. So yeah, that's my question for Dallas. Can Kyrie get through a season without causing some sort of distraction that ends up screwing up the Dallas Mavericks season? Because let's be real here. The West is going to be nuts. It's going to be really good. There's probably 12 to 13 teams that deserve to make the playoffs, or at least the play-in. And if you're ranking teams based on talent, the Mavericks are not in the playoff conversation right now. They are a play-in team at best, because they have Luka and Kyrie, who basically are both the same player. They're both super ball dominant guards who can't really defend. So the Mavericks don't have any wiggle room to deal with any crap off the court if they can avoid it. So yeah, that's Kyrie, and that's my question for the Dallas Maverick. Well, I guess we'll see what happens with a lot of these questions. You know, some of them are obviously very broad. What's this team's plan? You know, what will they, make the playoffs or whatever? But then there are those others that are very specific to a particular situation, particular player, particular player getting better or worse, or staying healthy or whatever it is. So, yeah, I guess we'll probably revisit these in, I don't know, 6 months from now when the season's over, and see kind of how all these played out. All right, so far on this podcast, we've, to start the NBA season, we've talked about team tiers, how I think they're going to finish in the regular season. We've talked about awards. We've talked about burning questions for each team. But there's kind of one glaring thing we haven't talked about. Who's going to end up in the conference finals and who's going to win the NBA championship? Obviously, it's way too early to make a real prediction. But screw it, we're going to do it anyway. So I guess let's start with the East. There's really two teams. It's a 2-horse race in the East for the most part. It's Boston and Milwaukee, and I think those are the two teams we probably see in the Eastern Conference Finals. I I suppose you could potentially make an argument for Philadelphia, assuming the James Harden situation kind of works its way in Philadelphia's favor. Um, Potentially could see, Cleveland have an argument if Evan Mobley kind of takes that leap that we all want him to take. But if we're being real and we're making predictions, I think it's going to be Boston and Milwaukee in the Eastern Conference Finals. No, so I think the choices for who's going to be in that series is relatively easy as of right now. Now the question is who's going to win and make their way to the NBA Finals. You have Milwaukee who has probably the best duo in the NBA, maybe the second best duo in the NBA, depending on kind of how you feel about those guys in Phoenix and Denver. But they regardless they have two of the top 15 players, top 10 NBA players. So they're have a real good shot, obviously, of beating Boston. Boston, I would say its top two isn't as good as Milwaukee. Brown and Tatum are not as good as Giannis and Lillard. I will argue all day for Giannis and Lillard. However, I think Boston's a little deeper. They got still Drew Holiday, they got Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford, Derek White. You name it. They've got I think a little bit more depth than Milwaukee. With all that said, I do think in the Eastern Conference Finals, I'd probably take Milwaukee as of right now in that series. They have a better top two, and I do think Milwaukee overall, while their defense will be a little worse than it was last year, I think their offense, adding Dame Lillard, will far outweigh the loss on defense. So I like Milwaukee coming out of the East and making it to the NBA Finals. Now for the West. The West, I think this one, again, I think there's one obvious, for me, number one team in the West. And then there's, I think, two teams that are kind of competing to play against number one. So for sure, I think the Denver Nuggets will make another run to the Western Conference Finals. They have the best player in the NBA. I think they have the best starting five in the NBA. And right now, their biggest question is a little bit of their depth, but I think they have enough rookies and veteran players that can, I think, more than make up for the depth they lost over the summer. So I like Denver to be in the Western Conference Finals. And then for me, it's probably between Phoenix and LA, the Lakers, LA, not the Clippers. And if I were to choose, I think I'd probably go Phoenix. So I think as a prediction right now, right this very second, obviously injuries are going to change everything throughout the season. Guys will play better than expected, worse than expected, whatever. But I like Denver and Phoenix as the Western Conference Finals matchup. To me, it's Phoenix has the best big three in the NBA when you take, Booker, KD, and Beal. They did a fantastic job of filling out the rest of the roster. Given the resources they had, Eric Gordon, Watanabe, I guess Yusuf Nurkic. So they have a decent supporting cast around kind of their big three. And Booker especially, that dude's a baller. And he's hungry, and I think I would pick them to be playing Denver in the Western Conference Finals. With that said, however, in terms of who from the West will end up in the finals, the NBA Finals, I would take Denver. Like I said, the best starting five in the NBA. Denver beat Phoenix last year. I think Denver is a deeper team than Phoenix will end up being. And again, best player in the NBA, best, I think, duo in the NBA. And obviously Denver has that elite playoff riser, Jamal Murray, who while he hasn't made an all-star team, he is probably a top 20 player in the NBA when you consider what he's done in the playoffs in his couple of appearances. So, prediction this year, I like Milwaukee versus Denver in the NBA Finals. Now, in terms of who wins that series, that's tough, man. I think, if I was impartial, maybe I'd say something slightly different. I do think it's kind of it would be a toss-up between Denver and Milwaukee in a final series. But I think I'm going to lean Denver here. One, again, I think best duo in the NBA. Obviously Lillard and Giannis are probably the only team that could potentially claim that. I think they have the best offense in the NBA in terms of efficiency. They're run by the best player in the world in Jokic. So this year for the 2023-24 season, I like the Denver Nuggets to go back to back, repeat as champions. I know it's not like a crazy out there pick, but it's hard to root against a team that went 16-4 last year in the playoffs. They kept their entire starting five intact and also brought back Christian Brown, who was kind of their one of their energizer bunnies off the bench. And the pieces they did lose over the summer. I think they've done a good enough job in the offseason kind of finding guys that can replace that production both through the draft and through free agency. So I like Denver to win the NBA Finals this year. Like I said, 16-4 last year is ridiculous. There really wasn't a series. There really wasn't any doubt. I mean, Minnesota took them to 5, but that was never in any doubt. Phoenix was probably the closest one, took them to 6, but then Denver blew them out in Game 6. And then the Lakers was a sweep, even though I will admit all of those games were very close. I like Denver this year as your NBA champions, and obviously we'll see what happens. We'll get a much clearer picture come April when the playoffs start, and I guess we'll revisit these predictions and see if we're still on track, or if maybe one of these 4 teams I have going to the conference finals has fallen off big time, or something. So there's a major injury, or maybe a trade has shaken things up. But yeah, Denver Nuggets, future 2023-24 champs, back to back. All right, that is it for me today. Thank you so much for listening. I do really appreciate it, or watching if you're on YouTube. I will. Now that the NBA season started up, I'm excited to kind of get rolling with this podcast. Actually being able to talk about some real life basketball that's happening, rather than doing predictions and talking about what could be in the next season. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe and like and do all the things on all the platforms. And also don't forget to I have other socials as well, Instagram and X or Twitter. Depending on what you want to call it. I think X is a dumb name personally, so I'm just going to call it Twitter. So yeah, don't forget to follow me on those things. I'll be a little more active now that basketball is actually starting up. But yeah, I will see you guys next time. Have a wonderful couple weeks.